Good afternoon. My name is Tim Lynch. I am your host on the Massachusetts LGBTQ Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you live every third Wednesday of every month. If you would like to call in, please do. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. Our guest here today is Suffredini. She is the Director of Mass Equality. Hi, Kara. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being. Great to be here.
Just by way of background, you've been here before, but remind us again, what is Mass Equality and what do they do?
Sure. Well, Mass Equality is the statewide lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender advocacy organization. We are working to ensure equal rights and opportunities for LGBT people from cradle to grave in schools, in marriage and family life, at work, and in employment.
And you've recently had a wonderful victory
right.
with the signing of the Transgender Rights Bill.
That's right.
Now, what does that do for our community?
The Transgender Equal Rights Bill includes transgender people in our state's civil rights laws, essentially, and in our state's hate crimes laws. So it includes protections in employment, housing, education, and credit, as well as inclusion in the anti-bias protections inside the hate crimes laws. We're super excited about it. It actually goes into effect in July, on July 1st. It's a great law. It's not perfect. The original bill had included public accommodations protections, and the committee, when it initially reported the bill out, reported it out without public accommodations protections, so we will have to go back to win those. But we're thrilled, and our hope is that the way this will change the landscape for transgender people and enable more transgender people to be able to be out and tell their stories will be the really important first step toward getting the public accommodations protections that we want.
Yeah, once they do come out and feel more comfortable, then people feel more comfortable with them. Absolutely, and realize that they're just like everybody else.
Absolutely right.
And so why shouldn't they have the same rights?
Absolutely right. And that was sort of part of the problem with the public accommodations protections, is there was still some reticence around truly understanding the lives of transgender people. And so once people get to know more transgender people, same thing as getting to know gay people. Once people know gay people, they support us, same thing will be true with transgender people.
And when we say public accommodations, what do we mean by that?
Well, it's interesting you ask that, because that's what made the debate so complicated. So public accommodations are basically any public facility, any facility that's open to the public. Grocery stores, buses, the T, gas stations, banks, all the places where we conduct our routine daily business. And opposition to this bill actually did a very good job of boiling public accommodations as a frame down to just bathrooms, locker rooms, and tried to use that as a way of stopping any of the protections in the bill from getting passed. Now, bathrooms, locker rooms, those facilities are actually very important for transgender people, and they should have access to them as well. But public accommodations are so much broader that what we have now under this new law is a situation where Dunkin' Donuts, for example, a public accommodation, would now be required under the law not to discriminate in employment. They would have to provide equal treatment to transgender people in hiring and in their employment practices, but wouldn't necessarily have to serve them under this law. So it's a little bit of an untenable situation, and we'll see how it plays out, and I think it will be something that resolves itself far quicker as a policy matter than the original work to pass the first set of protections.
And you're not saying that they do that, but you're just using them as an...
They don't, absolutely not saying they do that. I would hope that Dunkin' Donuts would not do that, but it's an example of a public accommodation. And sort of the untenableness of the current protections, where there are employment protections, but not necessarily protections on the customer side because of the lack of the public accommodations.
It's a very strange dichotomy.
It is. It is, and I think that folks, in the legislature didn't necessarily understand that that's the situation they were setting up as they were passing the bill.
So any store just cannot discriminate in who they hire, but can discriminate on who they serve in their store.
Technically under this statute. To be clear, there is actually pretty good case law in Massachusetts that would make it illegal for a public accommodation, a place of public accommodation, a bank, a grocery store, Chipotle, all the places where we go to get our lunch, to get our, to go to the ATM. There is really good case law that would protect transgender people in those circumstances. But as a matter of statute and trying to make uniform protections across the state, those protections are not yet in this statute. And it's just a little strange.
It is strange. And as I understand it, the city of Boston has been operating under an ordinance which outlaws transgender discrimination, including public accommodation.
Correct. Several cities have. Boston has been operating since 2002, since the Boston City Council passed it in 2002. But there are other cities, Cambridge, Amherst, Northampton. You know, there's over 150 cities across the country that have this kind of coverage. Most of these laws have public accommodations coverage in them. It's not an issue. It's a non-issue.
And more to the point, I think the bathroom issue, again, is something where the concern was predators coming into the bathroom. And I think District Attorney Jan Connolly for Suffolk County said they have no cases involving that. They've heard nothing like that.
Nobody does anywhere. Yeah,
so
that's right.
You've had this law on the ordinance in Boston since 2002, and nothing has happened.
Yeah,
you know, so.
That's right. And the Attorney General actually came out very strongly on that as well. She testified at the hearing, she spoke at the bill signing, she has spoken publicly at other events about not only is that a red herring and not a real issue, that there are no incidences of that, and that the law does nothing to change the criminal code. What's illegal is illegal. But that, from her perspective, having these protections in place just makes it easier for her to keep people safe. You know, it's a safety, there are safety issues not just for regular old people going into bathrooms, but also for transgender people.
So, well, with time, God willing. So that's a wonderful victory. I know that's been a long time in the making.
Yeah.
And certainly there are other things going on, particularly since it's the day after Valentine's Day, and I wore my red tie. I did want to touch upon the status of same-sex marriage in the country, and there's been a few victories there. There have, yeah. There was the Prop 8 case that just came out of the Ninth Circuit, where the Ninth Circuit concluded that Prop 8's only purpose, and for folks who don't know, I don't know if there's anybody that doesn't know, but Prop 8 was the ballot measure in California that took away same-sex marriage there. The Ninth Circuit basically upheld the district court's opinion and concluded that Prop 8's only purpose was to relegate same-sex couples to second-class citizenship, purely because some people just don't like gay people, and that's not a constitutionally permissible thing to do under the Equal Protection Clause of the federal Constitution. So Prop 8 was struck down, which I just think is just a tremendous affirmation of the dignity of LGBT families. And the great thing about the opinion too, at least from my perspective, was that it was such great evidence of judicial restraint. It was completely tailored to the facts of this case, tailored to California itself, but at the same time doing what is the role of judges and the responsibility of courts to, uphold the equal rights of all Americans. Yeah, people always seem to confuse that we operate under a constitution, and yes, we have majority rule, but there is a Bill of Rights.
That's right.
Where people's individual minority rights have to be respected. And as that particular case was very interesting because there was a trial where a lot of evidence was obtained. And one of the other issues on appeal was the fact that the proponents of Proposition 8, the proponents of marriage, didn't want the tapes of the trial released.
Right.
So they didn't want the public to see what happened in this trial, which is kind of odd.
Right.
So that was, so that's all interesting.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, the testimony in the trial was so overwhelming, and even the people that the proponents of Prop 8 put on the witness stand eventually admitted in their own testimony that, same-sex marriage was actually good for society because it gave more stability.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think they didn't want that information out because there's powerful testimony by families themselves about the impact, and the plaintiffs themselves, about the impact that this law had on them, the impact of the ballot campaign, and then the impact of the removal of the rights, because they had, California had same-sex marriage for a short period of time before Prop 8 passed. But then there was powerful testimony from opponents as well, not only conceding that marriage equality is good for LGBT families, just like it's good for everybody else, but also conceding that really the only reason that Prop 8 even existed was to keep LGBT families in second-class status. And as we know, I think the interesting thing about these ballot fights that we're seeing all over the country, and there are other states that we can talk about too today, is that as a matter of law, when the people vote, they are acting, they are standing in the shoes of the legislature. So it's just like the legislature taking an action, and they are bound by the same constitutional parameters as a legislative body would be. And a legislative body wouldn't be so bold as to enact, take rights away or enact some kind of discriminatory measure and say that the only reason they were doing it is because they didn't like the people that they were doing it to. And that is, it is harder, I think, in the context of a popular vote to control the messaging and make sure that that message doesn't get out. But that's essentially what the court found, that when you're standing in the shoes of the legislature, you have to obey the law and the Constitution, just like the legislature does.
That's great. And that's the other wonderful thing about litigation, though, is that it educates the public.
Yep.
And the public has seen what's going on here. They've heard the arguments. Unfortunately, they don't get to see the tapes. And we'll see where it goes from there. I don't know whether they filed an appeal yet to either the en blanc, the whole Ninth Circuit, all the judges together, or whether they'll appeal to the Supreme Court. They have said they're going to.
We'll have to see. Yeah, they will appeal. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, there's an open question. And then there's so many other questions. There's an open question as to where they'll appeal. There's an open question if they appeal to the Supreme Court about whether or not the Supreme Court will take the case. What will be the scope of that review? I mean, there's just so many open questions. But I think right now is just it's a very exciting time. It's a very hard-won time for families out in California and all of their allies who have worked hard to get to this place.
You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Our number here is 617-708-3290. Again, that's 617-708-3290. Well, yeah, moving away from California and up the coast, we had Washington recently. So that was a great victory.
Yep.
And then it looks like the New Jersey legislature is going to pass a bill, but Governor Christie has been
very clear he will veto it. Yeah, that's right.
So, but it's all progress, except in apparently New Hampshire, there's a movement to take away marriage again. There
is, but I think even in New Hampshire, we're seeing progress. New Hampshire's landscape changed dramatically in 2010. Like a lot of states, Republicans swept into the legislature. More than 2/3 of the legislature at this point is Republican. The governor is Republican, and one of the first things that was announced when the Republicans took control was that they wanted to have a measure that would repeal same-sex marriage. And so that's been discussed much since 2010. And so what's been happening up there, there's a campaign, it's called Standing Up for New Hampshire Families. And it is essentially, a campaign similar to what happened here in Massachusetts, where LGBT families and their children are going to lawmakers and they're talking to them and telling their stories and trying to change their hearts and their minds and their votes. And it seems like it's been pretty successful. The Republican leadership had talked about wanting to have a vote very early in 2012. It's been consistently delayed. One can only wonder why it's been delayed. But we do have some encouraging signs that it's looking like the governor is supportive. And so essentially what's needed in order to repeal marriage there is for the governor will veto any measure that passes, but then the legislature will have the opportunity to override that veto with a 2/3 vote. And we're getting some encouraging signs that the 2/3 of the legislature just aren't there on taking these rights away from these families. These families go in and they're talking about hugs and homework and bedtime and bath time like any other family, and it wins people over. Look, it's winning you over, just the thought of it. And so it looks encouraging. I think we're going to be okay.
Good. And as New Hampshire says, live free or die.
That's right, yeah.
And you either believe that or you don't. So
that's right.
I mean, so that's good. That's encouraging. So okay, and what else is there for mass equality in the future?
Well, we've had a number of things that we were working on while working very aggressively on the campaign around the Transgender Equal Rights Bill that we just didn't have as much opportunity to talk about because we were talking so much about the bill and really trying to focus people on those protections. But right now, we've got a couple of measures in the legislature that are in various states of movement, getting entertained by their committees, having committee hearings, being amended and such. Most of the ones that are looking like they have some near to date traction deal with youth issues. So one of the bills is a bill that would create additional funding to create housing and wraparound services and other support services for homeless youth. We are the first state that's had marriage equality. We've celebrated almost for 8 years now, but unfortunately 40% of our homeless youth population identifies as queer. About 3/4 of them are homeless and unaccompanied because their families have kicked them out for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. So this is a problem that we've actually been looking at since I came aboard 16 months ago, and trying to figure out how can we direct additional resources into the homeless youth population, which the support services for the general homeless youth population are just not culturally competent. There's not enough of them. So really working to address that problem. So as we see it, the first step is really getting a bill like this across the finish line, getting some support, getting some additional resources out there. And part of the bill will actually create a commission that will study homelessness in Massachusetts, and particularly homelessness for youth, and help us come up with some additional reforms that will help better serve this population.
When you say youth, I mean, what age groups are we talking about?
Up to 25, up to age 25.
And what was the percentage that are?
40%.
40%.
40%. And among school-age youth, LGBT youth are about 25% of school-age youth that are homeless are LGBT identified. And of the overall homeless youth population, it's 40% that are queer identified. Yeah, it's very dramatic. And it's dramatic in the same way that the bullying statistics are dramatic, right? The way we see that LGBT youth that are bullied are 4 times more likely than their straight identified peers to attempt suicide, 8 times more likely if they don't have the support of their families. And so that's another issue that we're working on as well. There was a bill, an anti-bullying bill that was passed here in May of 2010. And as part of that bill, the Attorney General was charged with creating a commission of different stakeholders in the schools to study implementation and to see if what was required under that bill was actually what was necessary to really impact bullying in our state. And she has since completed the study that she was supposed to do. She filed a new bill in May of 2011 that has some updates. And one of those updates is actually would require schools to have explicit protections for the most vulnerable populations of youth, which of course include LGBT youth, and that's something that we're working to pass right now as well.
So Martha Coakley is focused in on this as well.
She is focused in on this, yeah. She is actually a great advocate for the LGBT community. She was great on the transgender bill. She's great on bullying. Yeah, she's very attuned to what's going on.
This is wonderful. So, great. So what exactly, though, what kind of services are we looking for the LGBT homeless youth? And what kind of resources would they need? What's unique to them?
Well, I think right now what we're trying to do, I mean, one of the real focuses is just on cultural competency. So services that, if they end up in a shelter, keep them safe. We had, during the fall, while we were working very intensely on the transgender bill and doing phone banking throughout the day, we had a volunteer who would come and work in our office throughout the days. But, he was a homeless, homeless young person who would come and actually spend, he wanted to come and work on this campaign, but it was also a place for him to come every day. He's gay identified, and he had such traumatic experiences in Boston area shelters. And we're doing ongoing work with shelters trying to educate them about how to serve youth, but he had very traumatic experiences where he was not mistreated by staff, but mistreated by other people in the shelter, to the point where he didn't want to stay there anymore, and he was sleeping on a bench in Cambridge every night.
Wow. So he was victimized.
Yeah, and it's very poignant to be doing the work that we're doing and to have somebody in our office all day who's helping us do that work, and then at night when we shut down, know that they don't have somewhere to go where they feel safe. And he had tried multiple shelters, and so a lot of it is really about creating some more culturally competent care for youth in general, and then in particular for homeless youth who are queer, who don't have families that they can return to, and don't have families that they can return to, particularly because of their sexual or gender identity.
Well, it's shocking. And it's shocking specifically in Massachusetts. One wonders how much worse this problem is in other states.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah. Well, there was a national study that was done, and we're actually consistent. I mean, what I think is shocking is that we're actually consistent with the national statistic, which is that on average nationally, and of course it's probably higher in some states, but on average nationally about 40% of homeless youth are queer identified. What's shocking to me is that Massachusetts would be, in my opinion, underperforming on that statistic if we're equal to the national statistic when we're ahead in so many other areas of human rights. And it just shows, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I would say. So So the bill's in the legislature now? Okay, and I assume, you mentioned the Attorney General Martha Coakley's supportive. I assume the governor's supportive?
Yeah, the governor is, I mean, the governor's good on all LGBT issues. If this gets to him, I'm confident he'll sign it. Great.
So any timeline for it, or?
No, I mean, it has been through a couple, it's had a hearing, it's been through a couple committees at this point. It's being reviewed in the committee that it's in, and it's up to them how quickly they want to report it out. There's no way to know. But it is moving, unlike other bills, like the Transgender Equal Rights Bill that sat in the Judiciary Committee from the first time it was introduced in 2007 until the day it popped out on, November 15th of 2011. This bill is actually moving, and it's getting some serious discussion, which I find very encouraging.
Yeah, because I imagine lives are at risk.
Yeah.
And it's very sad.
As was true for the transgender bill too, but yeah, there are lives at risk.
Wow. Any other issues percolating at Mass
Well, at this moment, the other thing we're gearing up for is the election cycle, which is going to be a big election cycle, and doing what we do to make sure that we protect pro-LGBT lawmakers, get our supportive incumbents back into office, make sure that that positive challengers are elected that are supportive of our issues. And that's a big chunk of work that will really get started in March and will carry us through till November.
And let people know exactly what the issues are.
That's right.
Throughout all
that's
of
right.
this.
And we'll be looking actually to partner with the Bar Association on some work that is permissible for an association like yours to do, just educating people about where people stand on LGBTQ issues.
Oh, it's incredibly important that,
Yeah.
Whatever people's positions are, that they're known so the public is educated.
That's
on,
right.
on where their leaders or potential leaders stand on different issues.
That's right.
That's wonderful. You're doing wonderful work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Tune in next time, which I believe is March 21st, for the next installment of Legal Lines. I'll be having an attorney in Boston, Catherine Rubin, to speak to the impact of the new transgender law. Thank you again. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim.